It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. I have with us today Carla Conti, and you can find her at her website, Carla Jean Conti, and that's a G, Jean with a J. Okay, she just came out with this great new book. I don't even think it's even, ink's barely dry. Well, they changed the title of the book. Let me find it over again. They renamed the book while we were just warming up here today. Chained Birds, a true crime memoir of justice, survival, and the fight for redemption. Once again, you can find Carla Jean Conti at carlajeanconti.com. That's where all of her Twitter and Instagram you can find over there. And all of her Twitter and Instagram and all social media is all at Carla Jean Conti. Carla Conti, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me, Ed.
Thank you so much. And all the trouble we had trying to book this show with my computers being down. So thank you for your patience there. Before we get into this book here, Chained Birds, a true crime memoir of justice, survival, and the fight for redemption, tell us about yourself. Who is Carla Conti?
Well, Carla Conti is a pen name, but behind the pen name, I'm a former journalist who wrote a true crime memoir based on an experience I had, going back over a decade now, of writing a book about a federal inmate who I helped defend in a criminal court case because his attorney was my high school friend. So right now, the book just came out. I'm a nobody, but I'm a published author with this true crime memoir that we hope breaks out.
So let's get an idea. Where do you want to start with this? So we'll start with this Kevin Sanders, who he is and what his crime was, what caused him to be in prison?
Sure. Actually, we could even back up prior to that. There is an inmate sooner than he appears in the book named Stephen Tremblay, who is the inmate that threw a snowball at a corrections officer, and that pretty much launched everything. As I say at the beginning of the book, if that inmate had not thrown that snowball at that officer and hit him in the face, there would be no chained birds. So basically, this inmate, his nickname was Okie because he was from Oklahoma. He was in a recreation cage at Lewisburg Prison in early 2011, I believe, and he recognized an abuser of his from a previous prison, and this officer was about to lead him out of the rec cage, and on impulse, Okie scooped up some snow from an overnight snow, formed it into a snowball, and hit this officer in the face, and that took the officer aback, and the officer ended up falling onto the ground, and then Okie proceeded to give him some swift kicks, and the other inmates who were looking on were cheering him on. And the officer regrouped, and other COs came in to save him, and they face-planted Okie on the sidewalk, and the officer who was hit with a snowball, his name was Captain McDonald, he bent down and whispered to Okie, "Who around here can I put you in a cage with as retribution?"
Gotcha.
And that's exactly what happened. A few months later, he ended up going into a rec cage with Kevin Sanders, who is the inmate at the heart of my story. And that's where the criminal charges stemmed from and how I got involved in the case. So he was in that rec cage, and Kevin Sanders saw Okie being brought to the cage, and he knew there would be trouble, and he tried to warn the officers bringing him to the cage, "Hey, don't put this guy in here. There's going to be trouble." And the officers ignored him because they had orders from Captain McDonald to put him in that rec cage because they knew that he would be assaulted. My inmate contacted Kevin Sanders and his cellmate. They were under the protection of the Aryan Brotherhood at the time. They were associates. And the Aryan Brotherhood, or AB as we call them, they had a vendetta against Oki. They wanted to teach him a lesson. They were very unhappy about things he was doing on the tier. So Kevin knew that Oki was a marked individual and didn't want to have to participate in any assault. But as soon as Oki was put into that cage, Kevin did have to participate in an assault because an order had come down from the gang leader of the Aryan Brotherhood. And Kevin's cellmate was all too happy to participate in the assault because he was very ambitious. He was a Nazi lowrider looking to move up in the Aryan Brotherhood hierarchy. And his cellmate had a shank. Kevin had no weapon, but he participated by making it look like he did. He hit Oki with his fists using a stabbing motion, making thrusts that looked like he could have been attacking him with his own shank, but he did not have a shank. And Oki survived. All of his wounds from stabbing were on the left side, the side that Kevin's cellmate was hitting him from. And that particular assault turned into criminal charges, and Kevin's attorney was my high school friend, and my high school friend brought me into the case.
Now, at Lewisburg there, they had 3 guys in one cell?
2 guys in a cell, the size of a parking space.
Well, then how did you got Oki, you got Kevin, and then you got the...
Okay, that was in a rec cage.
Okay.
Recreation cage, yes. It was a very severely locked down prison where the inmates were only allowed outside of their cells for 1 hour a day, 5 days a week to go to recreation, in which case they'd be locked into a recreation cage, or they could have, I think, 3 showers a week at the time. So their everyday living quarters were very tiny, 2 people to 1 cell, the size of a parking space,
yeah.
And then, recreation where violence happened out there as well as inside the tiny little cells.
So now, before you got in contact with your ex-high school friend there, what was your experience with, like, the prison gangs and prison systems and prisoners and stuff?
0. I wanted nothing to do with this case.
And I bet you still don't. I bet you want less to do.
I know. It remains to be seen if this was a good idea. I just signed a book copy and sent it off to my friend Scott, and I said, thank you for bringing me into this. The jury's still out on whether or not this was a good idea. But when he tried to get me interested before I committed to it, I wanted nothing to do with these violent prison gangs. And he sent me a book on Leavenworth and gang hits, and I just was not interested. But then, boy, did my eyes become open.
Yeah, because, they're called prison gangs. Aryan Brotherhood is a prison gang started in the prison. But they have all sorts of contacts. People that go in and out all the time, and they have all kinds of contacts on the outside. And they're not afraid to use them. They've got, these guys have nothing to lose, even when they're outside. They're going right back. What a nightmare.
Their tentacles reach far. And something we learned, and at some point, my friend Scott convinced me to not only work on the defense team for the trial, but he convinced me to write a true crime story about this. He said, I have a front row seat to this. This will make a great story. And I was hesitant, but then Kevin, his client, thought it would be a great idea to write this story, and he would be my inside source and give me all this great information. Once it became known that someone was writing a book about this case and Kevin, that gossip spread so fast throughout the prison system. I mean, people would write letters. They'd write to their girlfriends. It would, go from phone call to phone call, and you just can't believe the almost underground railroad of gossip mongering that happens throughout the prison system. So, yeah, their tentacles reach far and wide outside of the prison walls.
Oh, yeah. You talk about the gossip and the drama that goes on with these guys. Because one guy will get another guy's girlfriend's phone number. They've been passing pictures around. Now he's calling guy's girlfriend behind his back. It's just crazy. Now, but you said you were involved in a criminal defense, too. Have you ever been involved in a criminal defense litigation before?
No, I absolutely did not. But I was a reporter for newspapers throughout the Midwest, and I did cover courts and criminal courts, so I was familiar. I used to write about, cover the police beat and, right in that general field. So I knew about it from that standpoint. And when my friend Scott asked me to help him, he really had zero help because he was acting as a public defender for Kevin. And he was getting no money from the judge for an investigator or expert witness, the kind of things that other defendants who can pay would have access to. So I did my best to help, but we did eventually get a real attorney to come and be second chair to Scott, and he did it pro bono, and that was the lawyer Jack Baer, who's just a wonderful, larger-than-life character in this story. And he really did come and just was like the cavalry coming in and helped shape things and take the soul weight off of Scott. Jack was very experienced, and it was great to have him on board.
And exactly what was Kevin being charged with, Kevin Sanders?
Yes, it was a series of assault charges, assault with a deadly weapon, intent to harm. I can't remember all the specifics, but it was just all in that assault range. And the thing about him even being charged, and of course he was charged along with his cellmate, he was considered to be short, quote unquote. That means he only had a few years left on his original 10-year sentence, and he would be out. So it was the kind of case that the FBI would pursue because they're not going to go after a lifer. What's the point of charging somebody who still is going to die in prison, right? But somebody who's going to be out in a few years, yeah, we'll charge him. It took the FBI a long time to bring their charges also. And Kevin's cellmate, who was charged, decided to accept a plea deal versus go through the, all the trial and the cost to the public and, taking up the judge's time on the docket, etc. So you can imagine what happens at the end of that trial when he is not exonerated. He gets more prison time than the cellmate who actually did the stabbing but took a plea deal.
Well, I noticed
5 years.
The cellmate is remaining anonymous in this story, right?
No. So the cellmate's nickname was Arson.
Arson, okay.
Marquise, Arson, not for reasons that you might guess. He was not an arsonist, but he was a hothead. So that was his nickname.
Okay, and did he agree to testify against Kevin Sanders?
He did not. Part of his plea deal was to not testify for Kevin, so he just stayed off the stand altogether.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And Kevin, you said now he's being charged by the FBI, which is like a 95% conviction rate, so he's pretty much has no chance whatsoever, especially from prison.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, and he did have the opportunity to take a same plea deal, and Scott tried to convince him that would be in his best interest. He brought a lawyer friend in to talk to Kevin, and Kevin was very adamant that he wanted the truth to come out. He wanted his story to be told. He wanted to get up on the stand and name names and, make it a public record about the kind of things that were going on at Lewisburg Prison.
So he wanted to expose the part about the guards, the COs bringing in this guy for revenge, but he didn't want to expose all of his Aryan Brotherhood friends, did he?
Well, he couldn't help but do it. He was forced to name names, actually. The prosecutor forced him to name a shot caller with the Aryan Brotherhood. For what purpose, we don't know, because it didn't advance their case at all, but it got Kevin in a whole lot of hot water. That ended up being something that became a big stream of gossip that, carried from prison to prison to prison, and it ended up being the thing that caused a hit order to go out on Kevin by the Aryan Brotherhood for the things that he said on the witness stand, including naming that shot caller.
Oh, boy. So how much time was Kevin, before he agreed to cooperate, how much time was he looking at, extra time?
Well, the plea deal his cellmate got was 5 years, so he could have gotten 5 years. But we lost at the trial level. We tried an appeal. The appeal was not successful, so his sentence ended up being 7 years. So he was 3 years away from finishing, got embroiled in this assault that he either had to do it or he himself would have been in danger from his cellmate for not participating, because you don't disobey the gang leader. So it was like kill or be killed, and that ended up giving him 7 more years.
And then that would have to be a very difficult time for him, because now he has no friends in there.
Yes, well, he was moved eventually to another prison, and the first prison that he went to out in Florence, ADX in Colorado. Okay. That's where an Aryan Brotherhood associate tried to kill him because of the things that he testified about. But then he survived that, obviously, and he ended up spending the rest of his sentence in Florida at the Coleman II facility near Orlando.
Gotcha. So then, what was he trying to? What did he ultimately expose about the prison itself, the real corruption?
Well, interestingly, NPR and the Marshall Project teamed up, and they released a series of reports in 2016, or one large report between the two outlets. And it detailed a lot of the abuses that were happening to inmates individually, the way that the inmates were restrained. One of the biggest problems was the protocol in the way that the correctional officers would take the inmates from place to place. The inmates had to put their hands behind their back and put their hands through the food slot, and then the officers would cuff them and then go in and retrieve the inmate to take him somewhere. But that left that inmate completely vulnerable to his cellmate, who may or may not have murder on his mind and or a shank. And that protocol led to so much inmate-on-inmate violence and deaths. And civil lawsuits started happening. There is an advocacy group in Lewisburg called the Lewisburg Prison Project. They were getting letters about this, and this was starting to reach the outside world. So NPR and the Marshall Project wrote about those abuses. And I, of course, heard all the same kind of stories from Kevin, just anecdotally more of the same. But what Kevin brought to all of this was the corruption that happened between the correctional officers and really the gang leaders. I mean, sometimes it was just an enabling relationship.
Yeah.
Sometimes the gang leaders were like the only ones who could control their people, and they meted out their own discipline, to their members. and they worked in consort with each other. But also, some officers, and they're in the minority, but, they have vendettas, and they are in a position of power. And with this one Captain McDonald in particular, he used all of that and had a vendetta against Okie, put Okie in that rat cage to get killed, and one thing led to another. So
let me back up for a second here, because you mentioned this procedure of handcuffing them behind their backs through that little slot, right? Now, from my experience, that's known as close custody, right? And people in close custody are housed in single unit housing, one man to a cell. And would this also involve like the belly chains and the leg chains too?
Well, if they were being transported in a vehicle, going to another facility, yes, they would get the whole shackles at the ankles, the belly chain, and the handcuffs to the belly chain, right? But just in Lewisburg Prison, to go to the shower, to go to the rat cage or wherever, yes, that was the protocol, because Lewisburg had been designed as a facility to hold the quote-unquote worst of the worst, most violent inmates across the federal system in a misguided effort to try to make the other prisons safer. Right. That's what this whole, they called it a special management unit, SMU. That's what the whole SMU program was designed for. And Kevin got transferred there, not because he was one of these violent criminals, but because it was very convenient by the Bureau of Prisons, because he was coming from a prison 20 miles away.
Yeah, there seems to be, I don't know if you uncovered this too, if you noticed, there's a lot of corruption too with transporting these prisoners all over the joint, just sending them back and forth. It seems like a lot of it's done by private companies that have contracts to make that money, and they're just shuttling these guys around for no reason.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that? Did that come up in your story?
No. But, transportation on Con Air did come up in my story. Kevin wrote it a lot, which, the inmates came up with that nickname after that Nicolas Cage movie, Con Air.
Yeah. That was a good movie, too.
Yeah.
But now, back to Kevin Sanders and Arson and Okie. Were they able to work while they were in prison? Did they have prison jobs?
No. The SMU program did not allow for any rehabilitation. They had like a 4-level step program that involved taking some classes. It was really a lot of workbooks. With the idea that at each level, if you passed it, you would earn some greater freedoms. But it was very austere, very restrictive, and just too many violent personalities on top of one another in this very old, decrepit facility in cells that were designed for just one person. It was a terrible setup.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare, I tell you. And you mentioned, too, some of the corruption with the corrections officers, too. Bringing in contraband and stuff like that. Did that come up in your story?
No. It was such a restrictive, locked down situation. I think it was probably the only prison Kevin served in where there were no drugs, or no drugs that he talked about or could see, and no homemade prison wine. It was that locked down.
Amazing. And still they got multiple people to a cell. That's a kind of a cross contamination of procedures there. Very, very interesting. So Kevin gets convicted. He has to do another 7 years, and then they're putting hits out on him.
Right. So I stayed in touch with him as he served out his prison sentence, and we had this collaborative project of writing the book. He would send me letters and stories, and he's a very talented artist, so he drew a lot of sketches for me and pictures, and the cover of the book has a bird on it, and it's from a sketch that he drew, and that actually is where the title comes from, Chained Bird, although I changed it to be birds, plural, which I explain at the end of the book. But he was a partner in this idea of creating the book. And then there were times when I decided I didn't want to write the book, that I didn't think it was a good idea. I didn't feel it was safe. I didn't think he should have to look over his shoulder when he got released, even though he wanted this book very badly to be out there. I thought, it's probably better for him if not. And then Scott and we had some threats made against us for the stories that were going to be coming out in this book. But even during the times that I wasn't writing it, it was something that gave him hope and something that gave him a reason to get up in the morning and write me letters and send me drawings. So it was a good relationship to keep him going, and he provided me with a ton of material, enough for 3 books.
Do you plan on writing 2 more books?
I do plan on writing other books, probably not on this, unless there is something mysterious that might happen. At the end of the book, his character, it's a bit of a mystery as to what his final arc has become, and that could change with the release of this book, awareness, how much traction it gains in the public square. It's possible there could be a follow-up, so you never say never.
We're talking to Carla Jean Conti. You can find her link tree at carlajeanconti.com. The name of the book is recently changed. Jane Bird, A True Crime Memoir of Justice, Survival, and the Fight for Redemption. But if you go on Amazon right now, the title is slightly different. And you can see a picture that's I guess that's an owl he drew on the cover of the book. Very well done.
I think it's an eagle.
It's an eagle?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it could be an eagle, yeah. I guess it could be an eagle. Okay, so now...
We'll call it a predatory bird.
Gotcha. So now, Kevin Sanders, how does he feel? The book hasn't really got just came out. So, but how does he feel? Do you think it was wise of him to want to write this book and draw more attention to himself?
I personally don't, but he was very adamant about it, and it really wasn't until 2023 that I decided I would write the book. So, again, it's almost kind of a question mark, like, was this a good idea? I guess we'll find out. But I do feel good about the information that has come out that he wanted to expose. A lot of it is piggybacked onto the work that NPR and the Marshall Project did in 2016, but new revelations also. So I think he would be very glad about that. But also, I have to say that my publisher, Wild Blue Press, has been very accommodating in allowing me to write this book while changing names. Not everybody's names, but some names, and changing some locations, as some kind of measure of protection. And we know, nothing is 100%. But I've just tried to strike a balance between how to tell this story, how to honor what he wanted to have happen, but do it in the safest way possible. And we think we've done that.
And great reviews on Amazon, too. Almost all 5-star ratings. Now, what was Kevin Sanders, what was the original charge that caused him to be in such a serious prison, facing 10 years?
Right, that was a drug charge. No, well, it stemmed from making methamphetamine in a camper, almost like a Breaking Bad, episode. But he was found to have had a sawed-off shotgun in his possession, and he had already been a felon. So, felon in possession of a shotgun, automatic 10 years. And he was out in California at the time. And interestingly, it was his father who was a Hells Angels chapter president and taught Kevin how to cook meth in that camper, who turned his son in to the ATF. And Scott and I both got a very kind of cryptic story from Kevin about why that happened. And Kevin's reasoning was, well, his father had been envious of the money he was making in the camper. Plus, Kevin had learned how to tattoo and do airbrush designs on Harley fenders and muscle cars. And Kevin said, well, my father was just jealous of all of this money and everything. Well, I come up with a different reason at the end of the book that is very plausible. And that's what sent him all the way across the country, was getting turned into the ATF by his father for having this sawed-off shotgun. Kevin was so despondent about this new charge, he asked the judge to send him as far away as possible from his horrible family in California. So the judge sent him to Allenwood, Pennsylvania. And that's where his federal prison saga started, in Allenwood. And I should tell you the story of why he went from Allenwood to Lewisburg Prison. That initial transfer that happens at the beginning of the book occurred because Kevin was an associate, and a high-ranking associate, of a Hispanic gang in Allenwood, which is very unusual because Kevin is Caucasian, and you usually fall in with race-based gangs, based on your race. Yeah. But he spoke fluent Spanish. So he was just taken under the wing of the Montanistas in Allenwood, and he rose to a pretty high rank where he controlled the prison yard in Allenwood. And one day, the leader of the Montanistas wanted Kevin to assault another member who was Kevin's best friend. And Kevin said, no, I am not going to do this. So he disobeyed that Hispanic prison gang leader, and therefore his life was in danger in Allenwood. And the Bureau of Prisons had to move him for his own safety, and they chose Lewisburg, which was 20 miles down the road.
What about write-ups during? Was he doing good time and write-ups during his? Any issues there?
Yeah.
Misbehavior?
No. I mean, he was not the model of prisoner that the Lewisburg SMU was designed for. He actually had a really good write-up for a prison yard cleanup job that was his. It was in sanitation, and he had excellent marks for that, going above and beyond. His prison record was cherry-picked to make him qualify as someone who could enter into Lewisburg. So inmates don't have any agency, no one to advocate for them. So that's where he went, and that's all these things happened to him after that.
So he's out now, though, right?
Yes.
And how is he getting along in society these days? Did he trade in the trailer?
Well, it was a rough start, and people will have to read the end of the book because I do talk about how he was released, the various things that happened to him as soon as he got released, and then he was not able to maintain the happy life on the outside that he seemed to have for a brief moment, and he couldn't hold on to it. And it does stem from an addiction issue that had always been in his background. And like I said, the arc of his character is somewhat of a mystery. It's a little bit of a cliffhanger. So I can't say for sure how he's faring right now.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned that you and your friend Scott started receiving some kind of threats or intimidation. What was going on there?
Yes. So when Kevin was finally released, which was during COVID, and he never was able to participate in a halfway house program because COVID shut down that program along with everything else, right? So he had to serve out all his time at his prison in Florida, and he was released to a homeless shelter in California, the state where he came from. That was just the Bureau of Prisons' way of doing things, and there was no other way around it. He had no support network other than Scott and myself. We gave him some, small monetary support, emotional support, but we live on the East Coast. He was being released to the West Coast. This was during COVID. He had a premonition that the Hispanic gang that he defied in Allenwood that caused him to be sent to Lewisburg, that they would want revenge for disobeying that order. And also, he happened to get put into a rec cage in Lewisburg with that Hispanic gang leader. If you can imagine that gang leader got transferred to Lewisburg just ahead of him, and it wasn't supposed to happen, but Kevin ended up in that rec cage first before the other rec cage incident. And luckily, no one was seriously hurt. Nobody had shanks, but there were a couple of reasons that Hispanic gang wanted revenge against Kevin. And Kevin had this premonition that when he got released, they might come after him. And it appeared that that's exactly what happened. As soon as he got off the bus, he got involved with some people that seemed to be associates of the Hispanic prison gang, and they followed him to a motel, and a bloody showdown ensued. And that led to some state charges and a parole violation charge immediately. I mean, within hours of him getting off the bus, he got involved in this. And so he was put in the local jail awaiting charges, and I got a phone call not long after, and he told me my life was in danger. And I just couldn't even process what he was saying. And he said it stemmed from his personal possessions, his address book being taken by the Montanistas, and my information was in it, Scott's information was in it, and he was really trying to convince me that I needed to try to get some kind of security detail or let the police know or something, because he thought that the Montanistas would do anything to send a message to him, including harming people that he cared about. So that was one of the moments in my journey where I said, I am not writing this book, right? This happened in 2021.
Right. So that warning came to you in 2021.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And so have you experienced anything since then?
No, luckily. So that's another reason why I thought it was okay to go ahead and write this book, but still try to do it as safely as possible, changing names and locations.
But did you change every name?
No, the entire case is factually accurate.
Right.
It's just names have been replaced.
Gotcha. Okay. And what do you think with the Sanders? Do you think he was just being paranoid, or because he should realize, you're a civilian in all this, man? I really don't think you would have that much problems with this. Do you think he was just being paranoid, overly cautious?
It's hard to know. That's definitely possible. I mean, paranoia and PTSD, that comes with spending many years in prison. It also
meth.
comes
Yeah.
meth. It comes with drug use. Exactly. And as it was unfolding in real time, I didn't have that perspective to understand it as I do now. And I think there are a lot of things at play. Some of it could have been how he was perceiving things, whether it was correctly or not. But do you take that chance?
And plus, like you said, he was just in this big bloody fight, fight of his life. He has every reason to be, panicking, And now, are you still in contact with him today? Can you guys still chat back and forth? Do you talk to each other?
I have not heard from him in quite a while, and that's why the status of him at the end of the book is a bit of a cliffhanger, because I don't have current information past the end of 2022.
Did you leave off on good terms?
Yes, we did.
You were telling me, too, that there's something about the prison program. Is this a prison program to alleviate these problems, or was this the prison program of putting these people in these wreck cages to get them beat up?
Oh, yes, I think I mentioned on social media that I was wondering if we'd have a chance to mention this pilot prison program here in Pennsylvania that was just profiled in our Philadelphia magazine this month. And I think I'm going to link to it on my blog. But it's a unit of a state prison in Chester, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly. They call it Little Scandinavia, and they are trying to model this unit on the behaviors that Norway conducts its prisons with, all across Europe, Western Europe, and in Scandinavia in particular, the recidivism rate is much lower than we have here in our country. And this pilot program took a unit of this Chester prison, and they've been having terrific success where the interactions between the officers and the inmates is just almost not camaraderie, but it's very different. It's not austere. They use something called dynamic security, just much better interaction, because the inmates are treated more humanely and with dignity. They have more freedoms. They don't have cellmates. Their cells look a little more normal, like maybe a dorm room. The whole idea is that suffering doesn't lead to reform. And in the model for Scandinavia and in Europe, their focus is rehabilitation, whereas our focus in our country tends to be retaliation or retribution. And so they're having great success with this pilot program, and there's just a wonderful article in the Philadelphia magazine that talks all about it. And I appreciate you giving me the chance to shout that out.
Yeah, little Scandinavia, they call it, in PhillyMagazines.com. Yeah. But, the thing is, with American prison system, the whole American justice system, is so many people are just making so much profit from all this. They're just making so much money. The phone calls, the commissary, the contraband that gets in and out of these prisons. The people, there's some prison corrections officers that only take that job because they know that they can sell drugs inside the prison. So it's, and then the recidivism rate, like you said, it's insane. You don't have a chance. 30%. And that's if you've got a family, you've got a job, you've got an education, you've been through drug programs, then it's 30%. Otherwise, forget
Agreed. Oh, totally. And there's no magic bullet, but, so much of it comes down to funding also. There are never enough correctional officers to perform their job safely. They should be paid more. There should be better and more facilities, so we don't have to have people double bunked in tiny cells where it's a terrible situation. And then also we don't need to incarcerate so many people for, nonviolent drug crimes, etc. I mean, there are too many things at play, but there are models that exist in other places that we can learn from, and this pilot program is really trying to do that, and I'm excited to see if it branches out. I believe there are some other states, the article talks about, where they're attempting to have their own pilot programs to see how it goes.
Yeah, I got a friend of mine just got out to 25 years for marijuana.
See? Unbelievable. I mean,
I know. And now you can walk in, they got legal stores at every corner. Just
right.
Insult to injury, Now,
yep.
Carla Conti, where were you before you got exposed to all this? Did you think like, oh, these guys need tougher punishment, or did you realize the prison system was a mess? Where were you before?
I never even gave it a thought. And I think, like most Americans, nobody wants to think about it. Nobody's interested in knowing what goes on behind prison bars, right? Prison walls. I'm hoping that people will find this story interesting enough that they'll want to find out what happens to these people and keep reading to the end. And along the way, they will learn something about the criminal justice system, about our prison system, something they didn't know before, and maybe something they didn't know they wanted to learn.
Hey, back to Sanders. Now that he's all this time has passed, is he back in with the gangs, or is he on his own?
No, he would have left gang life behind, but that's as much as I know.
Because you got to imagine, he grew up in it. He grew up in the Hells Angels. The guy had no chance.
Right. Exactly. Well, right. He was a product of a home where the Hells Angels were prevalent. Their drug of choice to consume as well as commerce was meth. He learned how to cook meth, became a meth addict, back then. His parents were abusive. His mother was an alcoholic. There was sexual abuse that happened in his early youth, and it's amazing he functioned as well as he did in between the times that he was incarcerated and then while he was incarcerated.
I just want to make it clear that neither Carla Conti or Ed Opperman are disparaging the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, which I'm sure is filled with many fine people as well. So we don't want to make any enemies over there. Okay. The book, again, once again, is called Chained Birds, a true crime memoir, but then it was just recently changed to... that's how you can find it on Amazon right now if you tune in right now this minute. But then... where is it? The new name. Chained Birds, a true crime memoir of justice, survival, and the fight for redemption. How about these other characters, Okie and Arson? What are they doing? You stay in touch with them?
I had contact with Okie. He served out his prison term, and he was deported to Canada, where he came from, and he is not allowed back into the country. He would have testified for us had we won an appeal, but it would have had to have been a video link, I think. So that's my last understanding of him.
And what about Arson?
Arson, I believe, was sentenced to more time for robbing casinos out in Las Vegas.
Really?
Yeah.
What was it? Do you remember what his real name was? 'Cause I spent 20 years in Vegas.
Mark Keys.
I'll have to look that up. Mark Keys. Yeah.
You might be disappointed. Remember, I changed names.
Oh, okay. Okay, then I gotta look it up. Okay. Well, what do you call it? Carla Conti. Is there anything I haven't asked you about the story you'd like to share with the audience?
I suppose one other thing that I can say we revealed in Chained Birds that other news outlets did not reveal, and that was the origin of the Special Management Unit. And this goes to the prologue at the very beginning of the book where I talk about a correctional officer from Atwater, Jose Rivera, who was brutally stabbed by 2 inmates on his unit, and they were drunk on prison wine. And I described the whole scenario under which he was chased and stabbed, and he was not able to get the help he needed immediately because there was a very terrible policy of him having the only unit keys to the front door. So it was extra time that these inmates were able to attack him. And the whole special management unit creation in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania stemmed from that one incident because the Bureau of Prisons was under a lot of pressure to do something. And they came up with this, let's corral all the worst of the worst inmates across the country in the federal system into one prison. But really, the killing of Jose Rivera had so many components related to it that it was like an apples and oranges situation. So I feel pretty good that we were able to expose that fallacy as well.
Gotcha. So that's what brought about this whole situation where they have to get handcuffed while they're still in the cell and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Carla Conti, thank you so much. CarlaJeanConti.com. That's where you can go and find. She has a newsletter she puts out. And plus, you can find all the links to her social media. The book is called Chained Birds, a true crime memoir of justice, survival, and the fight for redemption. If you'd like to leave us with something, we got about a minute left.
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk in such a casual conversation that was, I think, really enlightening. I've enjoyed the conversation a lot, Ed.
I do as well, and I do appreciate you being so patient with me with the scheduling and all my problems here with my computers and hurricanes and sandbags and all my stuff going on. So thank you so much, CarlaJeanConti.com. Good night.